Thank you very much for your invitation, and thank you to all the key organizers behind this Labor Fest. It is a complete honor to be here, especially in an ILWU hall. All my life, I've practically lived in union halls. I was born in the movement, so I feel like I'm in my living room right now. Let me please just begin by saying, a little bit about myself. My name is Desirée Rojas. I'm the president of Labor Council for Latin American Advancement, AFL-CIO, and that's my dad right there, Al Rojas, my papa. We also have another e-board member of our chapter here, Gabriel Torres. Please wave your hand. If you want to come up here next to me, that would be great. LCLAA Sacramento chapter has been doing a lot of work since the beginning out of Sacramento, Northern California, and the state of California, and in its partnership with unions in Mexico. NAFTA generated a huge concern amongst many union workers, particularly LCLAA members, my father, Gabriel, myself, and some brothers and sisters who have crossed over, like Alex Garza and others who were part of the beginning fight back on NAFTA. Well, it's 2019, and now we're still dealing with NAFTA and USMCA, which is in Congress right now, that hasn't been passed, but the effects of labor in Mexico and here. So I'm not going to preach to the choir. After hearing our brother from Turkey speak, which blew my mind and gave that insight about what's going on in Turkey, I mean, it just made me angry, but it also made me happy to know that brothers and sisters in Turkey they're fighting back just like we're fighting back, just like they're fighting back in Mexico and all over the world. I can't go on any further without saying it is a complete great honor to be in the presence of our hermana Susana Prieto Terrazas. I just see her as an incredible giant who's just made an amazing amount of history out of Matamoros, Mexico. And whenever I get the chance, I tell her story and I ask people to get on her feed and line, because what's happening in Mexico is just absolutely historical right now. I know that many of you feel that we're making baby steps and large steps, but we're being pushed back. But I really believe that our pushback has made a lot of people, especially in the Democratic Party, which is, in my view, has not done anything, hasn't done much for the workers in our country. And we all know where the Republican Party stands. The two-party systems in our country has just failed the working class and failed the poor and failed people in our country. Now, without getting into too much of those politics, in Sacramento, in LCLAA, we do a lot of work connected with labor and community, and we partner with a lot of organizations that do a lot of grassroots work statewide and nationally. We're very connected and work closely with our chapters from back east in the west, and we're all doing the same thing. We're organizing in our communities. We are making connections with other groups and people. We're on the front lines holding our so-called representatives accountable who really are not doing anything for us. But recently we did have a major press conference at Doris Matsui's office. We were very disappointed that she voted in favor of the $4 billion to be allocated to the immigration bill going towards private prisons. Like, what are you thinking of? Why would you do that? So did Garamendi, and so did most of them, because they're all tied to the dark money. They're all tied to privatizing. They're all tied to the open checkbook with no accountability of spending taxpayers' dollars. And so you know well enough what that all means. And really what it means is that capitalism is on steroids. It's hurting communities in Mexico, here, and all over the world. But in this forced migration, You know, in this process of forced migration of people leaving lands and forced migration into other countries, let's say the United States into California, the asylum seekers seeking help, going, forced into the ICE prisons, they come out, they're seeking help for housing, food, and our community is left with this weight of delivering. This pressure of delivering to help people. It's not falling on the government, it's falling on our communities and people who care. But in this forced migration, people are losing their lands and their pueblos where they come from. And somebody else is taking over. Somebody else is taking over those lands for cattle, for resources, for oil, and that's a large part of this package that we need to talk about. You know, we all know what privatization is. We know what that is. Capitalism on steroids, take the power away from the people. But if we don't start moving in the direction of taking over our community seats in our local government, you don't have to be a part of a party. We have to get behind people that are willing to do these jobs to prevent money from being misdirected somewhere else. And in Los Angeles, the Union del Barrio is doing exactly that. We're trying to do that in Sacramento. And I know other people are trying to do that in many other places. But the entire private prison industry in this nation comes straight out of the industrial war complex. They're making money off of refugee camps. They're making money off of the prison industry. And the whole idea of moving people and separating families means more money for them. They're literally taking away newborn babies from their mothers. And they're putting them in baby seats inside of buses with toddlers and other children, and they're taking them to a different encampment or a different prison, and they're sending the parents to different states. Why? Because they're moving those people, they're moving families around so that they could spread the wealth amongst that federal contracting with those prisons. So we demanded the end of streamlining right away. We demanded the shutdown of ICE prisons, but more so right now, the end of those federal contracts with those prisons that are in violation of child abuse and abuse against humanity, which is all of them, right? So building that pressure in your community like we're doing at every level, through faith groups, organizations, community, through labor. Labor should be doing more in this case. You know, labor should be doing more with stopping, and as far as I'm concerned, shutting down business in order to get the attention of Congress and our so-called leaders. We should be shutting down businesses and shutting down the comfortable way of life in order to send a message that we're not going to tolerate these fascist policies. We have a lot of work to do, but we're doing it. We're doing it. And I think that learning from each other and learning what other people are doing is very key and very important. Our work in Mexico, our work in our community is very important, as it is to be here is very important. But I'm going to pass the mic over to our sister here, Erica Rubio with Union del Barrio. But I do want to say that everybody's role in shutting down these ICE prisons is very important. And people are doing very creative things, from faith-based groups, organizations like LCLAA. We're partnering with people. We're putting pressure on representatives. We're going to different towns. We're going to different cities. We're holding up streets. In some towns, the community is coming together by the hundreds and grabbing hands and singing songs to protect families in their homes. And that's working. That is working in some places. Anything and everything to assisting families who are seeking asylum, donating money to those organizations that are doing the grassroots work. Anyhow, Anyhow, again, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody for your time and for allowing me to speak here. And again, a big abrazo, un beso muy grande for our sister Susana, who came all the way to San Francisco to be here with us. Thank you for all the work that you've done. Thank you for everything you've given. Thank you for rising a movement that has given us so much hope here and to people all over the world. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
What do we do when our communities are under attack? We stand up, fight back. That's what we do. Hey everyone, my name is Erica Rubio and I'm part of the organization Union del Barrio. I've been part of it for about 4 years now. As you can see, we've heard all of the crap and all of the crazy and inhumane stuff and injustices that this capitalistic government has done to our communities. And this is where we talk and, you know, we come to a conclusion that mourning and crying is not going to solve all of our solutions, you know. We got to come together and form committee resistance. Union del Barrio created committee resistance that, you know, unite the communities and discuss how can we defend each other? How can we stand up for each other and, you know, use whatever we can, but any means necessary so that we can defend our community and stop this, you know, genocide and massacre and, you know, imprisoning our families in cages and sending them into concentration camps to stop. So we urge and we want to communicate with the communities and everyone out there who is being oppressed by this capitalistic system to come together and defend each other. Because it's time for us to come and organize. It's time for us to stand up and say, you know what, this has got to stop. And we're not going to allow you to come and keep killing our families and imprisoning them and treating them worse than animals. And by that, you know, there's so many ways that we can organize. In San Diego, what we do is we have community patrols. Yeah, that's what I said, community patrols. We defend and we patrol the streets of San Diego, and we look for signs of immigration customs vigilante in the communities, and we urge the communities, you know, and to unite and, you know, defend each other, communicate whenever there's raids happening. And today we had actually a committee resistance meeting where we discussed ways that our community can, you know, protect themselves, knowing your rights, how to deal when an incident happens, when ICE confronts you, how to approach when someone is detained or in any situation that, you know, our families are being oppressed by this corrupt system. And with that, I just want to say that I'm glad to see all of these unions here and, you know, fighting. And, you know, seeing Susana Prieto Terrazas, that is amazing, you know, what you're doing. You know, I think that we just have to keep pushing, you know. We're in the belly of the beast, but that doesn't mean we can't kill the beast. That's where we start.
My name is Steve Zeltzer, and I'm with United Public Workers for Action. And first of all, I want to thank the ILWU, Local 34, for allowing us to have this meeting, very important meeting in this hall. The ILWU is a very important union in the history of the United States because in 1934, the longshoremen, who used to have a shape-up in San Francisco, before they had a union, they used to have raised their hands and beg the boss for their jobs when they got on the wharf. And the longshoremen formed an independent union. They were part of the ILA, and they formed an independent union because the other union, the ILA, was corrupt, was in bed with the bosses. So they formed an independent union, and they went on strike in July 1934 for a union hiring hall, where the workers would have control of the hiring. And in that strike, the owners, the ship owners, brought in the police. They brought in even students from the University of California, the athletes, to take over and work on the docks. And they also brought in the National Guard, and they set up machine guns along the waterfront. And that strike, two workers were killed by the police at Stewart Street on July 5th, and as a result of that, there was a vote by the San Francisco Labor Council to have a general strike. Now, one of the important things about that strike, and one of the reasons it was successful, is that Harry Bridges, the leader of the ILWU, knew that in past strikes, the companies would go to the black community in San Francisco to recruit them to be scabs, African-American workers. And he, understanding that and being an anti-racist, he went to the black community and the churches, and he said, if you support this strike, I will make sure that you have jobs on the docks, that your community will have jobs on the docks. And the black community stood by the ILWU, and as a result, today, the majority of the longshoremen in San Francisco are African-American. So you want to know a history about ILWU and the fight against racism. And that was not the only incident, because the Marine Cooks and Stewards, which was a communist left union, was the first union to have gays and African Americans. But in San Francisco, they refused to sail ships that weren't integrated. They said, if this ship is going to be segregated, it's not sailing it. We're not working it. They forced the ship owners to allow integrated ships by withholding their labor. Most people don't know about that, how they integrated the ships. And that's one of the reasons the capitalists, the right wing, wanted to get rid of communists and leftists in the unions, because they were actually integrating the working class. They were uniting the working class on a class basis. And that was a very dangerous thing. So that's an important part of the history, and the ILWU still exists, even though there continue to be numerous efforts to destroy the ILWU and its history. The ILWU also, and this is very important, had the support of a guy called Viktor Arnatov, who was a Russian who came to the United States, and he was a painter, and he became politically active. He became a member of the Communist Party, and he went to Mexico and studied under Diego Rivera. He worked with Diego Rivera on the murals in Mexico City, if people have been to Mexico City and seen those murals. And he came back to San Francisco, and he worked at Coit Tower, which many people are aware of, the great murals at Coit Tower. And he was among a lot of people, refugié, who worked on the Rincon Annex murals. And these murals actually told the story of American history, of working class history, of the strikes, of racism, of the working class struggles, hangings. If you go to Rincon Annex, you can see those murals. I mean, they really show the struggle of the working class. And for that reason, at that time, in the 30s, at Coit Tower, they prevented that mural from being displayed, those murals at Coit Tower. They actually tried to stop them from being displayed. And they were worried they would be destroyed. In the 53, they tried to destroy the Rincon Annex murals. And there were protests there by the ILWU to protect those murals and other people. And that's the reason those murals still exist, because of the labor movement and the community uniting on the streets in front of Rincon Annex to protect those murals. Now, as part of Labor Fest, one of the things that we do are history of the WPA monuments, schools, and also art. And it turns out that there's another attack now on the George Washington High murals by Richard Arnatov. And these murals that he did were WPA murals. In fact, the high school was built by the WPA. These murals actually reflect a critical view of American history, because they show George Washington as a slaveholder with the slaves that he owned, which was uncovered at that time, and most people do not know about that. That was in the school, in a high school. And also, they show the expansion of the West and the settlers who George Washington supported walking over or by a dead Indian, dead Native American. So that history, at the time, they did not put up signage about those murals. There were no signs explaining what those murals were, because if they had put up signs, probably Nixon and the right wing would have said, this is proof positive that these murals are reactionary and have to be destroyed, because they actually tell the true history of the United States. That's why there's no signage. And in the 70s, in the 60s and 70s, there was a struggle of the African-American students, BSU, to remove the murals or to get something else. And Dewey Crumpler, this African-American artist, painted other murals reflecting the united struggle of people against the system, against capitalism. And those murals are up at George Washington High presently. So what's happened recently is there's been an effort to destroy those murals by some in the Native American community, saying that they're traumatic and that they harm the students and we should whitewash them and we should destroy them, destroy these art murals. And you would think like 84, 85 years after these murals were done, that there'd be an effort to destroy these murals in San Francisco, the center of all these murals in San Francisco. But it happened, and the school board of San Francisco voted unanimously to destroy the murals and spend $800,000 to destroy these murals. So saying they're traumatic. And we had a meeting of Labor Fest on last week, and we had a couple of hundred people here, and there are people who came who are in support of destroying the murals who disrupted the meeting. And they spoke up while Robert Cherney, who wrote a book on the life of Victor Arnautoff, was speaking. And as he was talking about George Washington and the treatment of the slaves in the mural and how they broke the treaties with Native Americans, a broken branch, and how these murals show that, they did disrupt the meeting. They stood up and started yelling and screaming, and they got up on the stage, and they were trying to disrupt the meeting. And we said, shame, shame, you cannot do this. You cannot disrupt a meeting on the history of Victor Arnautoff, on the nature of these murals. And it turns out that one of their members who disrupted the meeting, we actually told them to leave or behave themselves, and many of them sat down. One of the women who actually disrupted the murals, after we had discussion, we said, you can speak, you can just have to speak after the speakers. No problem, we're democratic, we don't stop you from handing out flyers. So she came up here and she said, you know something, I learned a lot today. I learned a lot today about the murals that I didn't know about. So, you know, this is like, yes, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn, and that's why we were happy to have that meeting. And the latest development is that we did a video of that disruption, and we put that out. And there was a Chronicle reporter there, and tomorrow's San Francisco Chronicle, Willie Brown has an article. He's the former mayor of San Francisco, the former assembly leader in California, has an article saying that these murals were important to him and his daughter because his daughter went to George Washington High. And she came back from going to school and said to him, she questioned him about these murals of slavery, of African Americans, how they're displayed in this mural. So he had a long discussion back and forth with his daughter about these murals. And he said that somebody was at a restaurant and somebody at the restaurant said, should these people be recalled? Can they be recalled on the school board? He said, well, that's a question to ask. So, I mean, the fact that the former mayor, formerly assembly leader, has an article with the link to the video on the website raising this issue of these murals and the history of the murals, that's important. That means this history is relevant today. This history is relevant today. It's not some history, it's going on right today. This is important, and for Labor Fest, the history of the working class, the class struggle, the workers' movement is important for all working people. Every country's history, Turkey, Korea, Iran, all countries of the world have working class history, and that's what Labor Fest is about, looking at that history.
Steve, is there any chance that they can get an injunction to stop them?
the murals are not going to be destroyed. You can rest assured. I will guarantee the murals are not going to be destroyed. This has gotten so hot nationally and internationally. When you have the former mayor and assemblyman saying they should be recalled, he said, yes, they can be recalled, the Board of Education. I would say the next Board of Education meeting is probably going to be, shall we say, lively, because all the people who are worried about that very question, whether or not the murals are going to be destroyed, are going to be at that meeting. And I think that those people, including Mark Sanchez, who's the vice chair of the board, who on his own said, well, this payment, this destruction of the murals is the first payment towards reparations for the Native American people. So the idea that you would have reparations for the Native American people for the stealing of their land and the genocide against Native Americans by destroying a mural that portrayed that is quite amazing, you know, so you can rest assured. But I do think we have to continue to educate and organize, and the fact that these people, young people and other people who came to the meeting to disrupt it, themselves did not even know about the history of this mural. That's a serious question. Why hasn't there been education at George Washington High about the murals? Why do people not know about it? I had proposed at the Board of Education meeting that it be a requirement for every student in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Unified School District, to have to come to George Washington High and have a class on the murals, have a walkthrough and lesson on those murals. So anyway, that's one part. Now, so the focus today's conference is the question of the international campaign against privatization and outsourcing. And this issue is at the forefront, really, in part of the rebellion that's going on today against the attack on migrants and concentration camps being set up. Because actually the privatization and the outsourcing of jobs is precisely what is driving migrants from Central America to the United States. It's the U.S. intervention, NAFTA, CAFTA, these trade agreements, which have forced people off the land in Mexico. Millions of workers, farmers were forced off the land, ejidos, by privatization of these lands, by NAFTA. So this issue is very much connected, and I think, as we'll learn today, this morning, and in the afternoon, where we're going to have a delegation from Mexico, from Matamoros and other parts of Mexico, we're going to learn what the conditions are for the workers in Mexico, how the exploitation, the terrorism that they face in Mexico is connected very much to the economic policies of the United States. The United States wants slave labor in Mexico and Central America. They don't want unions, independent unions. They want conditions in which workers are highly exploited. And the maquiladoras and NAFTA are an example of what happens when you have capitalist control of corporate control of trade, where workers are in subhuman conditions in Baja and other places. So that is a direct result of the economic policies of the United States with privatization and outsourcing. So our first speaker is going to be Richard Stone. Richard is a delegate of the San Francisco Labor Council, and also he's an activist. He's on the KPFA CAB, Community Advisory Board, and he has been an activist in fighting for against privatization of the post offices in the United States. And this attack on the post office system, which was set up by Benjamin Franklin many years ago, and is actually in the Constitution, the protection of the post offices, has been a target of the owners of FedEx, of the owners of these companies who want to privatize it and break the union. So welcome, Richard Stone. He's a member of APWU.
Oh, okay, all right. Before I start, since Steve did mention that we work with KPFA, I think it's also noteworthy that at this point, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're the only labor organization that also supports the plight of Julian Assange for the said resolution that was put both to the Pacifica Foundation and KPFA was something that we were able to pass, albeit a fairly watered down version, but still it's a little bit more than a small victory on that part. So I'd like to thank Steve on that. Yeah. Yeah, so my full name is Richard Stone. I've worked for the post office for 26 years in the maintenance. I'm basically work for maintenance support, for operations. My official title is custodian. I'm sort of one of those, jack of all trades, type of workers. Where I do, maintenance and clerical work and with the consolidation of the work rules, I also, tend to micromanage a lot of the the contractual work that is actually part of, the whole privatization scheme. They actually use the workers, the actual workers, and they create a division so that they collude. It's called FSO. I forgot what it is, but they actually use that to have like a type of program where you have both in-house and contracted workers and maintenance, but. And also, I'm a delegate, an APWU delegate to the to the Labor Council. So, and given this brief talk, I want to set it up by describing what it is that actually that creates the premise for all the privatization. And it's something that happened in 2006 when Congress, over the years under the Bush administration, dating back to 2003, tried to create pre-funding mandates to make the post office. Initially, it wasn't for the health care plan, but it was actually for paying military benefits, which. But they weren't able to pass that bill. So what they did is they wrote a bill. It was HR 6407, and it was basically, even though it had been the previous versions or incarnations of bills that were going through Congress were debated. This one was pretty much like a rider bill. It was just pushed through at the last minute. So part of the pre-funding mandate. That was in HR 6407 was for the post office for a period of 12 years to pay $5 billion into to pay the public benefits of employees that are going to retire 75 years from the time that the bill was created, which in this case they would be able to. It's still about 63 years, so basically it's sort of like like a fund, a trust that they're creating, and of course Congress has actually been dipping into that to actually pay off the national debt, like what the very last debt ceiling they had under Obama. They were able to actually dip into the whole federal pension system. It wasn't just the post office, but they've used about $10 billion of this funding that they set aside to actually pay it off. So there's like a double standard. The post office has no control of the money that they have to take from the beginning of the fiscal year, the revenue, the $5 billion. But the thing is, they haven't been able, because the post office, until the time of Amazon came along, was really operating at a deficit anyway. So they can't even pay it off. So I mean, they can't even put the money towards towards it, because they actually don't have the revenue to do it, because they're operating at a deficit. So where they're supposedly have like about 50 or $60 billion. They don't. They actually have a revenue shortage of about $23 billion. And the thing is, if the post office were full tomorrow, the taxpayer dollars would actually be, stuck with that. So that's a very troubling notion to think that something like that would happen. So anyway, not to go but much more, just a couple things. Even though they're laying off through attrition, the workforce, especially where I work, even not only just as a custodian, where we all have a third of the staffing that we had about 10 years ago. There's also a veritable consolidation of work roles, where in a way you sort of operate like a operate like a workers-owned co-op. The only difference is the workers don't actually have a say in the financial thing. So in a way, it's really not that. So, but the last thing I'd like to say about that, there is an actual bill that that is, I can't remember what house it is. It's probably the Appropriations Committee or something, but it's HR 2382. It's actually a bipartisan bill. That's one of the good things about the post office. It still gets a little bit of bipartisan support, but even with the Republicans being in power of the Senate Homeland Security Committee and the House Appropriations Committee, as long as you have, Republicans in charge, you're going to have, problems. So, and it has 167 co-sponsors. Now, now to move on to one of the more grand privatization schemes that they had for the periods of 2013 and 2017. That was the Staples campaign, and basically, what that was, it was what was dubbed as a retail partner expansion plan. They the post office at Staples, created an agreement where they would actually, have what would be the equivalent of a, say you walk into a, into a retail lobby and you deal with the mail clerk. Well, you do all your business with the mail clerk. Well, with Staples, they tried to set up they actually set up a pilot program at roughly 500 of the 1,267. That was at its peak. At first, it was like a few, but actually, a couple of them were actually here in San Francisco when it first started up. But the APWU really did good. I mean, they were there at the forefront, especially our local here, because one of the national organizers for the campaign actually worked out of our office. Mr. Your brother Alan Benjavar, and he worked in conjunction with our with the regional APWU director Omar Gonzalez. So. We were very grateful, as a union, to actually be joined in solidarity with a lot of people from from SEIU, the ILWU, and notably the teachers union, the local NEA and AFT chapters were really instrumental and out there every single time. And what eventually happened was the reason why that we were successful is because even though in the San Francisco locations we were able to disrupt the operation, when a lot of the protests that took place in like in the East Bay and the North Bay, they were actually able to shut down the store's operations for one day, and after doing it a handful of times, Staples eventually relented. So really was really proud to be a part of that effort. And as our president, our national president Mike Diamondstein, once says, the Postal Service is a national treasure that was treated like a trinket. And from the previous postmaster general, at the time his name was John Donahue. So yes, that's part of the. I mean, that was, with the outsourcing of work at the workplace is great, but this was probably by far the largest campaign that existed only until 2017. So we were hitting the streets right away when it was happening, and 4 years later they were able to we were able to quell it and or quash it and now all's good, I guess, at least on that front. But since the advent of who I call Agent Orange Julius Caesar, he has come into office. one of his first acts of office is he actually wanted to, privatize, the post office. And though there were no bills that were generated in Congress, it was, just the usual, Trump-apocalyptic bluster that, that just basically went nowhere. Because, like I previously said, we still, get bipartisan support in Congress, even when when it was when both the House and Senate was in power, both under Obama and Bush. Excuse me, not and Bush and actually Bush and Trump as well. So there's a new. Let me see. Yes, the two bills, they're basically similar in nature, and it's H.R. 33 that was wrote by Steve Lynch, and the good thing is even though it hasn't had any action yet, it hasn't come out committee, there are 258 co-sponsors, which is a good sign because that's more than the majority of. That constitutes, the majority, because, 435 times 2, so you would need like about 218 to have, if you were to vote on it, then it's good to have a majority, as you would know. And the same applies to the Senate, where you have, where you have 53 co-sponsors. And as a member of the Labor Council, briefly, there was the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, the ranking Republican Tom Coburn sponsored a bill it was like a carrot on a stick, for the post office. It's like, we will relieve you of some of your pre-funding mandate if you get rid of collective bargaining. That was Senate Bill 1507, and I was part of the national campaign that basically tabled that. And that, well, they didn't table the bill. It got deferred to the Senate, Finance Committee hearing, where they actually tabled it in a indicted committee when the term of Congress, it was up in 2010. So that's probably one of my more proud accomplishments now. Ever since 2013, and this is what I'm going to conclude with. There was an organization that was formed. It's called the Grand Alliance, and this sort of goes in theme with why we're here today to begin with. Anyway, I mean to begin with. So, the Grand Alliance itself is just basically. Alliance of both national and local organizations to help not only the the privatization of the post office, but also the privatization of members. There's 81 local organizations, and here in the Bay Area that would include the Alameda Labor Council, the Berkeley City Council, the Berkeley Post Office, defenders, as well as the Save the Berkeley Post Office Committee. I actually work with the Save the Berkeley Post Office Committee. I know what. I mean, the other one does exist, but there are actually two organizations, and the Contra Costa County Central Labor Council, and the 77 national organizations. Also includes the National Alliance of Postal and Federal Employees, the NPMHU, NALC, and the National Rural Letter Carriers Union, and last but not least, my union, which is the American Postal Workers Union. So the thing is, I would like to end this by reading the Grand Alliance statement, because this sort of goes in accordance to what we're all here for today, and that is a unifying for unification. It says, and this was written in 2013, and it says by the post office, is in the face of aggressive attacks, a wide range of national and local organizations have come together to create a Grand Alliance to save our public postal service. These organizations are united in the demand that the public good must not be sacrificed for the sake of private investment or profit. A strong public postal service is our democratic right. A Grand Alliance is fighting to protect and enhance vibrant public postal services now and for many generations to come. Okay, okay, all right. Okay, well, I guess I just rushed to the conclusion there. That was basically. Oh, okay, all right. Okay, all right, my apologies. Okay, let me, okay. Once again, this is the mission statement of the Grand Alliance. In the face of aggressive attacks, a wide range of national and local organizations have come together to create a Grand Alliance to save our public postal service. These organizations are united in the demand that the public good must not be sacrificed for the sake of private investment and profit. A strong public postal service is our democratic right. A Grand Alliance is fighting to protect and enhance vibrant.
Thank you, Richard, and also thank you to our interpreters who are key to allowing this to be an international conference for our brothers and sisters and comrades from other countries. So thank you to our interpreters here. And our next speaker is actually also an interpreter and was interpreting earlier, and that is her profession. Her name is Lisa Milos, and Lisa is a longtime activist in the immigrant community. Her mother was an activist and fighter for immigrants and political activist, actually, when she came to this country from Chile. And Lisa has been active her entire life, from a kid, doing work to build solidarity, to fight racism, discrimination, to fight for equality. And she is now a professional interpreter at the University of California in San Francisco. She's a rank and file member of UPTE, Union of Professional and Technical Employees, which is part of my union, the CWA, Communication Workers of America, which has about 700,000 members, and she's been active in fighting outsourcing and privatization. Welcome, Lisa Milos.
Hi. I'm like Steve said, I'm a rank and file member. I'm not a representative of UPTE, a University of Professional Employees union. I'm just a rank and file member, and I basically have work in that capacity with the union. Right now, I'm also going to be, I'm a delegate to the convention, the CWA convention that's happening in August, I'm sorry, in July, the end of July. And I think Steve promised a whole lot when he's talking about me, because right now, to tell you the truth, the struggle, we're in the middle of a struggle with regard to our contract at this moment, UPTE, together in coalition with AFGE. Neither of the unions have a contract. We haven't had a contract for like 2 years now. The struggle against outsourcing and privatization has been taken up more by AFGE than by UPTE, in my point of view. UPTE has been fighting against the UC trying to take over or replace our pension plan with a 401k. That was one of their points. However, their main focus has been on steps and more wage-related issues, more so than the actual political struggle that has to do with fighting UC, especially when it relates to top-heavy management and the whole privatization schemes that they have going on in different parts of the state, like at Sacramento, for example. These public-private ventures, UC Davis has with Kindred, for example, created the construction of a new rehabilitation center, which will be hiring non-union members, and those kind of denunciations continue we continue to need to fight those things. However, in my view, it's still not going on as strongly as it could. However, one of the small victories, and I call it a small victory because it wasn't necessarily as a result of the struggle or just as a result of the struggle of our union, but also as a result of political change at the UC, not completely political change, but some level of political change at the UC Regents level, that finally UC decided that it would pull back on its attempts to create a 401k an opt-out of the pension plan and an opt-in into a 401k, which would have completely, which would have been an attempt to dismantle our pension plan, our public pension. There was a lot of discussion last year internally and at the CWA level as well, where there was presentations by Matthew Cunningham Cook, a labor researcher, regarding how intrinsically tied these privatization schemes are to these corporations like the Blackstone Group and other corporations that our pension plans are also invested in. So, in other words, we are invested in a pension plan which finances Blackstone Group and many of these other corporations whose owners, like the Johnson families and things like that, are actively supporting measures against working people of California, like they supported the measure against Measure C, against rent control measures that we were trying to pass in San Francisco and in California. So basically, the discussion, the awareness that people are coming to with regard to these 401k, with Fidelity investments in particular, and how they are intrinsically tied to these basically major capitalist corporations and international financial speculators that are trying to destroy our workers and poor communities throughout. They're trying to destroy the pension plans and trying to put their money into that, to get the money out from there. And the outsourcing and privatization issues go a lot farther and have been going on for quite some time. We've been dealing it within the interpretation area in particular. We've been dealing with the use of video monitoring interpreting or video remote interpreting by these companies, private companies who do not use unionized labor, unionized interpreters. In fact, they offshore some of this work to people from outside of the country, and they pay them. They require, they don't require certification. They pay them much less. These video companies are permeating the whole interpreting field throughout the United States and creating this call center model that makes it very difficult for interpreters to be able to interpret without incurring in fatigue and therefore inaccuracies in the interpreting. I'm sorry, I think I was going way too fast, wasn't I? I'm sorry. Okay, I'll take over right after you. So right now we're still in negotiations with UPTE. UPTE represents 15,000 workers throughout the UC system, and it includes the healthcare unit, of which I belong to, which includes social workers, case managers, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech-language pathologists, nuclear medicine technologists. It also represents the units of the research. And research is particularly interesting because UC gets a lot of public funding for all the research from the NIH. However, these public-private partnerships it has with pharmaceutical companies ends up being a leech of the public resources, because all the results that the research attain ends up benefiting these pharmaceutical companies that are completely incorporated within the whole pharmaceutical thing, between the private investigators who are working for UC and who get funding from also these private companies, And the way the pipeline goes is that the public sector jobs are being, there's no steps, for example, for researchers who want to continue with their practice of researching. They haven't had steps in their in terms of being able to get regular raises that have been union mediated. They haven't been able to do that. So they're to a certain extent they're at the mercy of the private investigators, their bosses, and at the mercy of UC. In order to get any kind of promotion or any kind of raises, they're at the mercy of it. So they don't have any union-defined steps or union-negotiated steps, which is one thing that we are fighting for as well. In the healthcare, in the HX unit, we do have steps. Now, what happened in November of 2016, before the business support technologists, which were IT specialists, which is another unit which forms in the same bargaining unit as the researchers, they were not unionized at the time by UPTE, but they were completely laid off. About 96 of them were laid off throughout the state of California, and these are the people that that also they program and they can operate these very delicate kinds of like fetal heart monitoring technology that has to be done in real time so that the doctors who are actually performing the operations on fetuses can actually, get the IT information in real time. There's a lot of other kinds of, it's not only computers or people to update our computers, it's not something like that. It's work that requires people in the field as well. And they outsourced it to a company in India, and they made the people who, in order for them to get their severance pay, they made them have to train their replacements. And so they trained the replacements came to the UC, studied, did some work there for a few months, and then went back and were doing things over the phone, basically. We're doing their IT over the phone remotely. Well, that didn't turn out very well because there was a lot of mistakes being done, including some privacy practice in healthcare information, which was also happened as well. So what happened after that was the IT workers, the business support technologists or business support specialists joined UPTE as well, and so and UPTE participated in and helped sponsor a bill which prohibited offshoring. It doesn't prohibit outsourcing; it prohibits offshoring, but it has a caveat. It says, as long as there's no replacement, as long as workers, in other words, a contractor has to promise or certify that he will not hire workers from outside of the country, but he can if there's no replacement of actual UC workers. So we also are dealing with a situation of outsourcing by attrition, because when people leave the jobs, they don't bother replacing the actual career employees. They just put in people who are who are contract employees. And so they do have this public-private partnership going throughout UC, in the cafeteria, in the custodial areas, in the IT areas, in the interpreting areas. And we as interpreters have been, also in 2013, they tried to impose the video monitoring at UCSF. And that's when we found out what was going on in the other parts of UC, in the other medical centers, that they had already instituted them in some of the other medical centers. But we at UCSF stood up and we passed out a petition of 500, and we had 500 signatures of doctors and everything, that they preferred in-person interpreting. And of course, this is not an anti-technology statement. Basically, video monitoring interpreting has its place, but it's not within a call center model, and not for not for. There has to be some kind of criteria that's used that would basically permit video monitoring interpreting to occur without incurring any problems for the patients in the communication, because there's always issues with the technology coming in and out, the quality. The call center model itself has been criticized because it's putting interpreters in a situation where they have to be answering one call after the other, after the other, after the other. And there's already been studies that showed that that produces a drop in accuracy for the interpreting. Recently, interpreters are also joining up with the medical interpreters are also in communication with the court interpreters because, and at the immigration level now, whereas before there was in-person interpreters available to interpret for people who were asylees, who were going in front of a judge. Now the Trump administration has decided to forego interpreters completely and just put people in the same room with a video, giving them a rundown of what their rights are, with no opportunity to ask any questions or anything. I mean, they might, if they lift their hand in front of the judge and say, I have a question, the judge might call a phone interpreter at the time, but there's no available in-person interpreter which is basically a civil rights violation because the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act doesn't allow discrimination on the basis of national origin, which this is basically what it is. So I'm planning on going to the CWA convention to talk and have a nationwide discussion with interpreters from the courts, as well as from medical interpreters from Minnesota and other places as well, to see how we can address this issue with regard to interpretation, due process, and support the civil rights of the people that we serve, but also support the working conditions of interpreters and to try to stop this influx and this, not influx at this point, it's basically a takeover by this corporate model of video that is permeating in many other areas of our lives as well. And I'm not sure if I've covered a lot, but this is basically what I've been up to lately. I hope.
Thank you, Lisa, for that report and your ongoing struggle in the union to educate the membership. I know I attended a forum on privatization of pension funds at UC, and the UC regents are leading billionaires and capitalists, including Richard Blum, who is Dianne Feinstein's husband, and he is personally involved in pilfering, really, the pension funds for his own investments. So you have a situation of corruption, and that's really what privatization is, of handing off the public workers' money to private interests for speculation, and also would end up ripping them off if they put them in a 401k controlled by people like Richard Blum and other billionaires. And that's why it was an important struggle. One of the issues in San Francisco and around the country that is critical, and that is the politicians, the capitalist politicians, have used nonprofits to basically privatize public services. So, for example, in San Francisco, there was a ballot initiative, Proposition C, which was opposed by Mayor London Breed, to tax wealthy in San Francisco for homeless services, mentally ill care in San Francisco, which is good. It needs to be done. And it passed. But it turns out that $300 million, $330 million, which is going to be collected, is not going to be going to public workers, but it's going to be going to nonprofit organizations. And the situation of nonprofit workers is horrendous because many of the nonprofit workers in San Francisco make $15 an hour doing public work. And many of them are Latino, African American. They're the oppressed people in San Francisco. So what you have is an outsourcing, a privatization of public services, and workers who are doing the same work as city workers at 30 to 40% less pay, and they're doing the exact same work. So this is an issue. Now, one of the things that is happening in our society is the issue of home care workers. And as you can see, we have an aging population in the United States. We need home care workers. And this is a public issue. It's a public service to take care of people who are seniors and need care and are disabled. There's a union 2015 who is a former member, Brad Wiedmaier, who was on the San Francisco Labor Council, a delegate from Local 2015, SEIU, which represents the majority of home care workers in California. And he's been involved in a struggle in the Labor Council and in the city to raise the salaries of the home care workers. And I wanted to talk about one struggle in the Labor Council is that there has been a fight by the Labor Council in San Francisco to support these home care workers and other workers. However, there hasn't yet been a fight to say we should stop all privatization and outsourcing. And we should be clear that while we have to support the increase in salaries of the home care workers and other nonprofit workers, really, if these workers are doing public work, they should be public workers. They should get the same pay and benefits as public workers. So welcome, Bradley Wiedmaier.
Just a note on my status, just this week I am no longer with SEIU 2015, but I am a member of Provider Network, which is a group of providers. And if we didn't have members inside the union communicating with the membership, I would be there. But I think it's really important that what is happening gets out to the membership and to the public at large. You may have noticed, and you may not have noticed, the governor at the beginning of June issued an executive order for a master plan for aging. And it's to completely restructure the entire long-term care system in California. And this is coming on the heels of, we look at our situation in California, and we're really the last program that has home care workers that do not work for agencies but work for a statewide program called the IHSS, the In-Home Support Services Program. And so we're on the cusp of that changing as to with the other states. And leading up to that, to this point, there's also a new discussion about long-term care insurance. You know, we haven't even dealt, of course, with health insurance and mental health insurance. Everyone in here in the city has seen the fight that's been going on. But long-term care insurance is something that everybody needs. So that's another issue. SB 512 is coming from the state legislature, probably this session, that will establish a kind of funding mechanism. But the point is, will these jobs be converted into private agency-run long-term care workers? And that's part of our fight. Within SEIU 2015, we participated in a fight for the last 2 years against a bill that was rammed through the very end of the Obama administration as part of the 21st Century Cures Act. And that was requiring that home health aides use electronic visit verification systems instead of just signing time cards. And it was completely open to abuse, and many states have gone ahead and imposed this system. It was being imposed through the federal management system, basically, but it was voted on, included in this bill. Only a handful of people voted against it because it was part of opioid crisis funding and a bill. But what this did was require, it was introducing the requirement that there be GPS tracking of home care workers and other issues in our timekeeping and the management of our work. And so we led a campaign to, within the union and in the community, to limit the downsides of this proposal, electronic visit verification. And we were successful through the use of a weekly phone call that our local had to reverse not only our local's policy, they were like, oh, well, we have to do it, it's coming, just live with it. And the rest of the locals in long-term care across the country, most of them already had this imposed on them. And because California is lagging, quote, lagging in privatization of the IHSS program into private agencies, the West Coast, Colorado, all of the states that until recently were a public plan have been forced into this agency model. And so then now they're fighting a whole host of agency issues. Like in Oregon, they couldn't switch to a better agency for 10 years, and they've just recently resolved that. But anyway, so in our fight in the union, we were able to reverse the local, the state formation of SEIU, the state council, and the international's position against the wishes of these bodies primarily, because they were ready to go along with this. Because there's a feeling that we believe in our caucus, in Provider Network, that the union is interested in a statewide program instead of county by county, and also bringing in the private agencies so that there would be a closed shop situation for them. Home care is classified as a domestic worker task. And just to remind folks, farm workers and domestic workers were excluded from the Wagner Labor Act in 1935. Roosevelt needed the Dixiecrats to get it through, so he promised to those Southern governors and legislators that these industries would be excluded. And you know, the bulk of the workers were African American in those states. So we're still facing that legacy today. So it's been a real struggle to get the word out to the membership after the local shut down our ability to have a union-wide phone conference every week that people could participate in spontaneously. And they timed that right after the governor announced his master plan on aging proposal, which sets up a cabinet-level board of executives that will be advised by an advisory committee of people in the industry, but the ultimate call, it will be this cabinet-level group. And there's a similar structure in the long-term care insurance proposal in SB 512, which Richard Pan has put forward, of an executive body which has more legislators than the governor's does on master plan on aging, that will only have cosmetic advice from people in the community, the unions, and experts in the health field and the long-term insurance field. But they will have people on the board that represent the privatized insurance on both of these. So it's a real problem for the consumers and the providers of long-term care to have a say in the new makeup of what's coming down. And this is going to completely remake long-term care in California. And so the union has been, just in complete abstract form, supporting the governor's call. They would not give their position. They have not revealed to the membership what studies and plans and proposals are even out there. And so this is one of the reasons that it was really necessary to reverse just the reliance on the union and to form a caucus that's advocating spreading the word. So the difficulty of being a long-term care worker with the system as it is even is problematic, because the workers were, even though we're working for a county program, there is a complete confusion between who is our employer. Is the county itself our employer, or is, when we were negotiating on contract, we had to negotiate with a separate authority that's been set up called the public authority, or are we the employer of our consumer? So there was this real difficulty in our negotiations, and ultimately the real employer was the Democratic Party machine that runs San Francisco, is how we saw the relationship. And the union was supporting the mainstream machine candidates down the line most of the time, but there was the effort to put the pressure on this machine, because the machine under Mayor Lee and under under London Breed at the time, she's the head of the budget committee, was to do nothing. We were told for 2 years that you have agreed to the minimum wage, which, remember, as domestic workers, we are excluded from minimum wage law. Our workers in San Diego are sub-minimum wage in that county because we're excluded. But a few years ago, there was an effort to include us in the San Francisco minimum wage effort. And when we asked the union, like, is there, isn't there an interest, at least in leveraging the more labor-friendly and community-friendly candidates over, the party? I was told I had to corner one of the SEIU leaders in an elevator once to have, because he always would disappear from me. Wouldn't wouldn't it benefit us to have a more friendly worker Democratic Party? And I was told by Dave Kiefer, no, the Democratic Party is a command organization and it makes no difference. And so that's kind of the perspective coming from one of the top horse's mouth, that when we see the double-edged sword of the boss's party against us, London Breed, one of her main financial supporters was Dee Dee Wilsey, and now she's, with 2020 coming, building a huge war chest for Donald Trump. So, this is the reality that we're facing, and as being on the bottom of the working pyramid of working people, we are really subject to these kinds of we're at the bottom. That's all I can say. And we really need to fight to have a labor politic. And we did stand up and push for some of the other candidates that didn't say things like, here in this district, one of the machines candidates was saying that, what's wrong with contracting out? That's how you're creative in public financing. We did oppose that candidate and support other candidates that were more supportive of labor. But it's very limited because they answer to the Democratic Party, and they're ultimately under its control in San Francisco and California, but we see what's happening nationally. So we found it also necessary to break from SEIU politically, because they would never engage in discussions about working towards labor and community politics in the union. It was always, cope money for the Democrats. So right now, we will be standing up and doing petitions and reaching out to members to oppose a privatizing of the IHSS program in the state of California. It's the largest. We almost have as many members, almost 340,000 home care members. The size of California is really critical for the rest of the country. We're bigger than almost all the other state programs that are run by agencies put together. And we originally had a congressperson who was going to oppose the electronic visit verification flat out. But the union went to her and encouraged her to just support the modifications that we were able to wrest from California through our effort in the union phone call, and not necessarily put an opposition bill to it. And so that was another reason that we felt that it was necessary to speak up and put on the field the needs to protect workers from the really egregious tracking, GPS tracking, and other requirements that were being made. So I thank you for your time, and please pay attention to the long-term care developments that are being formulated in the next 9 months. It is the executive order by the governor. It has a March 2020 deadline. So they're really ramming through stuff that they already have drawn up that they're not letting us know what it's containing.